Hello everybody and welcome to OmniPoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. I'm Jack and today we're going to be taking a look at the past couple of weeks of online tournament results. This is all going to be post-Gdansk, so we sort of had that tournament to adjust to the meta, and you'll see a couple of decks pop up here and there that were popular in Gdansk or sort of broke out there. There have been tons of tournaments. I think I counted like 15 tournaments with over 100 players, which is typically our threshold for looking at a tournament. But honestly, if we looked at all of the tournaments, I'd be here until Christmas. So instead, what I've done is I've actually just gone for the tournaments which had a top cut. So there are, like I say, probably 10 or so tournaments which didn't necessarily have a top cut, or some of the earlier tournaments I've also discounted just because we want the most up-to-date meta knowledge. So yeah, we're going to be looking at a total of, I think, 9 tournaments today that had over 100 players and also had a cut to at least top 8, in some cases top 16. Going to be looking at the metagame, the pairings, the standings, and then a couple of deck lists in particular as well. So starting off with the Redacted Paradox number 4. This was, remind myself, this was the Monday after Gdansk, so again, lists has been released, this, that, and the other, so you'll start to see maybe some decks crop up. You're already seeing someone picking up one of the Palkia decks here, as well as a couple of other things here and there. You can see Snorlax still quite popular. Giratina, Lost Box, and Roaring Moon, the two most popular decks. Probably quite surprising, two most popular decks, given that sort of Charizard and Gardevoir and Miraidon are typically up there. You can see Charizard comes in at third, Miraidon all the way down here, and then Gardevoir even lower. Gardevoir had a really bad conversion, similar with Chien-Pao at Gdansk, so I'm not too surprised to see Gardevoir sort of falling off a little bit. 5% incredibly low. I still would have expected sort of a 7-8%. You also have to excuse me. I'm getting ill, unfortunately, right before Stuttgart, which is really annoying. But yeah, so ignore the sniffs and the sips here and there. But yeah, Giratina, probably quite popular due to Stall doing very, very well in Gdansk, obviously winning the event, and Giratina having a naturally quite a good matchup against it. So yeah, I can understand why that was the most popular deck. In the end, it was Mew that took down the tournament, but you can see we have a pretty varied top 8 different decks making top 8, which is always a pretty cool sign. A lot of variety there. You've got a Gardevoir, Chien-Pao, Giratina, Snorlax, Roaring Moon, Entei, and Lost Zone. So probably Charizard and Miraidon you would expect to be in the top 8 decks, maybe pushing out like Roaring Moon and Chien-Pao in terms of their position in the actual meta. But yeah, very, very wide meta game. And the winning list was a DTE Mew. Not too much to say about this list, to be honest. Very, very cut and dry list in terms of DTE Mew builds. Got the judges, got the paths, got all of the usual stuff that they try and use. Yeah, nothing too surprising here. Can't really say too much about it, but Mew evidently still on people's radar. I think it was a good pick for Gdansk, so I can still see why people were picking it up post-Gdansk. I think it was in a pretty good position. It did really well in terms of conversion rate as well, so I can see why people sort of flocked towards this deck, and it ended up doing quite well in this tournament. Moving on to the Cinnabar Island tournament number 5. This was on the Tuesday after Gdansk, and as you can see, Charizard, Gardevoir back on top. Charizard leaps and bounds ahead of every other deck, though, which is interesting. They have separated Lost Box Charizard, but this includes basically Pidgeot and Bibarel or Evo Zard. So, yeah, 17 decks, 12% of the meta, pretty respectable. Gardevoir, Lost Zone Box, nothing too surprising. Again, Miraidon still a bit lower, but I think it did have a bit of a target on its back after LAIC, so I can see why people maybe have been turned off from playing it a little bit. In the end, this was a cut to top 16, so pretty interesting stuff. You can see absolutely tons of Charizard made it all the way through to that 16. There's 4 Charizards in top 8 and a 5th Lost Box Zard in top 16. A few Gardevoirs, and few Entei Valiants making up the rest of the top 8, and then an Intel Urshi and a Lost Zone Box sneaking in there, as well as a Palkia list. Oh, there's another Lost Box Charizard. So yeah, Charizard did really, really well in this tournament. The winning list was a Pidgeot Zard. Looks quite similar to the list from Brisbane, playing that Minior, playing the Pidgeot, no Rotom or anything like that. Also playing the Justified Gloves, probably a really powerful tech in this tournament, because the mirror was everywhere. Justified Gloves is kind of like Defiance Band, but at all points, which is really good because it means that you don't need to sort of rely on how the game is shifted to try and weave in a Defiance Band. Lets you just immediately KO a Zard, even if you're not behind on prizes in the latter stages of the game. However, Defiance Band is really important sometimes for initially taking KOs on 2 prize Pokemon, as well as trying to deal with a Pidgeot a turn earlier than you usually would be able to. But you do have the Vitality Band, so at least you can get around it that way as well. But yeah, typically 2 slots for these sort of defensive or aggressive cards makes sense, but it's usually a Defiance Band over the Justified Gloves. Only 1 Vacuum is a little bit scary. 1 Vacuum, 2 Lost City. This deck's worst fear is Path plus Iono a lot of the time, because if they're able to deal with a Charizard and you're not able to get the next Charizard up, or you're not able to, you can't then try and fish for the pieces you need with Pidgeot. So a little bit scary in terms of the thin on the ground outs to Path. I've been playing a lot of Charizard post Gdansk, and that's 100% been like my biggest loss condition, is just random Paths sort of griefing you in Giratina matchups and even in Mew matchups where you should be very favoured. It can still just Judge plus Path can just like basically push you out of the game. So yeah, I'd like to see another out in here in terms of trying to get rid of Path. Everything else pretty standard. Avery, Joe and I had a discussion that, about this in sort of our testing group, especially after Avery started popping up in Charizard lists. We kind of concluded that the most logical solution for this was, to an extent, Mirror, but mainly Chi and Pow, just because Chi and Pow likes to go quite wide, so it forces them to have to sort of prioritize either 1 Bibarel or 1 Baxcalibur or whatever, and then you have Counter Catcher to try and sort of punish that and capitalize that way. I don't think it's too powerful. I think Chi and Pow's representation in the meta is really low at the moment, so it's not necessarily worth teching for. I haven't been able to find any other uses for it in particular. It may just be another card against things like Gardevoir and Mirror and stuff that obviously provides a bit of disruption. But I've been a huge fan of playing heavy Iono in this list, especially with Lost Zone decks starting to pop up a little bit more due to the success of Stall. Lost Zone typically has a pretty strong matchup into it, like I mentioned at the start, in particular Giratina, and I think Iono plus Lost City is really powerful, especially against things like Radiant Charizard decks, because you really can run them out of attackers now that you also have Jirachi to kind of really mitigate how much damage the Sableye can do. You can really run them out of attackers quite well. So I'm a bigger fan of like heavy Iono in Pidgeot builds, because you always have Pidgeot to sort of smooth things over as well. But again, I can see more raw draw supporters in this build, just because you're playing less outs to Path, so you need actual like better draw than just an Iono that's randomly trying to get you 2 cards in the late game. Maybe you do, even in that case, Avery is probably a better, just because it's a +1 compared to an Iono in a lot of instances in the late game. So yeah, pretty interesting list. Like I say, Minior obviously in there for trying to deal with Snorlax. I don't think you need to play anything other than Minior. I think Minior is fine. You don't need any like Tool Jammer or super effective glasses or anything like that. I think Minior played well at the right time should be more than enough. So yeah, other than that, pretty standard list overall. The Intel Urshi list that came second, nothing too major to note. I just wanted to note that there's kind of the debate at the moment sort of between 70 HP Remoraid's or 60 HP Rapid Strike Remoraid's. I'm personally still more of a fan of the 60 HP Rapid Strike Remoraid's, just because it gives you a bit more flexibility. I think if you kind of ignore the fact that, I guess, Mirror, but mainly Entei Valiant is sort of a bit of an issue with the 60 HP Remoraid's, I think that's the biggest concern. But I think you should be relatively favoured into that matchup, even without getting Auxiliary out, because just setting up 1 Inteleon is so difficult for them to deal with, especially if you can set it up on quite on not particularly wide board. It means that you're able to potentially try and like take 4 prizes with 1 Inteleon, or take 2 prizes and then try and Iono with the next Inteleon that's just way too big for them to deal with. So I don't necessarily think you always need Auxiliary out. Obviously, it's way better if you get it out, but I don't think you necessarily need it against the matchups that you're worried about using Remoraid. So I would still personally play the Rapid Strike ones, but I can see completely why the justification for Remoraid, for the extra 10 HP on Remoraid, is very relevant. I said at the end of the last video, or the last online results video, that I thought Rapid Strike was in a really good place. It was dominating the late night that night. Ended up coming, I can't remember whether it was 9th or 10th. I think it was 10th. Rahul finished in 10th in Gdansk. So I think I was pretty spot on with sort of where Rapid Strike's position was in the meta, which is why Mew also seemed pretty good, because if everyone was sort of flocking to Rapid Strike, and it's never going to be a super popular deck, but you can see people naturally picking it up, Mew still seemed good. I still back that. I still think Rapid Strike is in a really good position. I don't think it was scared too much by the results. I think I don't know how the stall matchup plays out. I can't think it's particularly good because you don't have very many switch outs. I think you need to at least play like a rope or something in the build anyway, like regardless of stall, just because I think rope's a really strong card in the deck, especially with things like Irida. Though this isn't playing Irida, this is just playing Arven, which is interesting. I wouldn't mind seeing Irida in the deck naturally, just to again try and build up combo pieces. Like it even unlocks Octillery to then search for anything in the mid game as well. So definitely would like to see some Iridas in here. At least one, probably over maybe one of the TM Devos, though TM Devo is also really important. So playing that in a 2 count could be important. But regardless, tangent. I still think Rapid Strike is really good. I think it could do well in Stuttgart again this weekend. I don't think it's too worried about anything other than the stall. I still feel like it's in a really good position. I think Mew is obviously a big concern, but I think Mew still should be sort of worried enough about things like Gardevoir and Charizard that you shouldn't be completely blown out of the water by like multiple Mews on day one. Obviously, it doesn't always happen. I think Rahul said he hit 2, and that was why he ended up going in at like a 6-2-1 record onto day 2. But yeah, regardless, I think there is definitely still some space for this build. I think it's very favourable into a lot of matchups right now, and I think TM Devo is... It was almost like this whole deck was overlooked because people were too busy looking at Iron Valiant, that I think TM Devo was a massive upgrade for this deck. It really helps with some of your more troublesome matchups that have been in the past, where like someone would set up a Charizard and you're like, oh well, like I really struggled to get through 330 damage, so this is going to take a few turns. Now you can just kind of do enough damage and then ignore it and have like a blow up turn later on with TM Devo, which is kind of one of Charizard's like worst nightmares. So yeah, bit of a tangent, but I think this deck is still really good, and if I had more experience with it, I'm pretty sure I would be definitely considering it for Stuttgart this weekend. Only other notable mention was that Palkia list that made top 16. Mentioning it just because it doesn't really pop up after this, so just wanted to point out it is a carbon copy of Luke's list, so not too many changes. Definitely worth sort of listening to the couple of podcasts he's been on, one on our channel, I think there's been on one on a couple of other channels as well, for how he would change the deck. He's had some ideas, the dropping of the Collapse Stadium, maybe looking at alternative win conditions against things like Gardevoir and Charizard, things like TM Devo and stuff like that. So definitely check out any content he's been on, because he may be able to lead you in the right direction for Palkia lists. On to late night 155. This was last week's late night, and these are typically the biggest tournaments of the week. Again, Charizard, Guardy, Lost Box, Miraidon, the typical few in the top or the most played archetypes. Nothing too surprising there, with the winner being Gardevoir. Again, very varied top 8 though. A couple of Mews, a couple of Charizard, but we're also seeing things like Miraidon, Goldengo, even a Roaring Moon making it into the top 8 as well. So yeah, pretty varied stuff. You can see there's actually a lot of Miraidon making it through to top 16 as well, so it still seems like a safe points deck, similar with Giratina, if you kind of look at these as like smaller regionals to an extent, which there's comparisons you can and can't make, but yeah, pretty interesting stuff. Gardevoir was the winner, like I say. A relatively interesting list, 4 Iono, and then a pretty thin supporter count, no Churro or anything like that. Is playing the Avery, 1 boss and 1 research. Don't hate it. No worker is a little bit concerning. Obviously, having the 1 vacuum kind of supplements that a little bit, but I still like worker power pad as kind of like a 2-card combo that works multiple times over like the vacuum or something. But vacuum is still really, really strong and has other versatility. I also like vacuum when you're playing Cape, to be fair. I'm a bigger fan of the Zacian over the Capes personally, but I think Cape, if you're playing Cape, vacuum is also really good because it lets you potentially take a 2-prizer back down to a 1-prizer with an Iono after you've put a load of damage on it. You can then turn it into a 1-prizer if you're able to vacuum the Cape off, rather than your opponent sort of relying on trying to get 2 prizes from it in niche situations here and there. So yeah, Cape over Zacian. Personally, again, not a fan, but I can completely see the justification. Stadiums makes a lot of sense. Nothing too crazy to say about the list, to be honest. Playing VIP Pass is the only other thing that's sort of in debate here and there. Also playing Cress and Jirachi. You typically see one or the other, but playing Cress and Jirachi, again, don't always feel like you have space for it, but yeah, I think they're both very, very useful cards, so I can understand the justification for trying to fit both in. The Roaring Moon list is the only other list that I wanted to talk about, just because we're not really gonna look at another Roaring Moon list today. I don't think there were any that placed higher. I could be wrong, but this was the one I wanted to point out, just because this is quite interesting. It's got only 3 Sada, which already sort of rings alarm bells a little bit to me, because I think Sada is the lifeblood of this deck. Obviously playing like the energy switch combos, so negates it a little bit, but again, if you're going full all in on energy switch, I've come around to thinking a little bit more on the Radiant Greninja side of things and playing some waters, so I kind of get that. Playing 2 Penny, I'd love to know what the pennies are for in particular. Obviously, you can reuse Moltres, you can reuse Mew, you can even pick up a Roaring Moon that's been that's taken 200 damage and then like attack with another Roaring Moon. So I can see the potential sort of synergies here and there, but it's weird. You need to like Roaring Moon. If you're going to Frenzied Gouging, you need to Frenzied Gouging plus Iono to try and stop them from having an answer to knock you out, and then Penny the following turn without necessarily having a huge amount of draw in your deck. So, yeah, it seems a little bit combo heavy in a deck that I already think has a lot of combos to it. But yeah, this is still my favourite way to play. The only other card that they're playing is the Protective Goggles, which gives whichever basic Pokemon it's attached to no weakness. I don't think there's enough grass attackers in the format right now to justify this. And everything else is pretty much fragile enough that it gets one-shot by almost everything anyway. So I don't think there's massive justification for the goggles. I can kind of see like if people are starting to pick up grass techs here and there, but I also don't think Roaring Moon is anywhere near popular enough for people to start teching for it. So I think you can definitely find an extra slot in here, even for like an extra Stadium or an extra Sada. It almost always feels like those cards are going to be more valuable overall. But yeah, most popular or the highest placing Roaring Moon list, or one of the highest placing Roaring Moon lists over the past couple of weeks, so I wanted to at least touch on it. The other late night was Late Night 156, and again, pretty similar top 5, Gardevoir, Miraidon, Losson, Charizard, very, very similar stuff going into the second late night of the week. This time it was another Intel Urshi that won. Again, pretty varied top 8. A couple of Snorlaxes starting to sneak in, but able to be beaten by some matchups that I think typically I would be surprised that beats them. I think Entei Valiant is definitely probably the most successful out of all 4 of these decks to try and beat a Snorlax stall. Typically Charizards, Intels, and I would even say Clorf Electrode. We'll look at the Clorf Electrode list in a moment, but do not have enough switching outs most of the time. So yeah, quite interesting to see them falling in top 8 typically, or that's not where I would sort of expect. This is not the top 8 that I would expect them to suffer in. It looks like the Giratina and the Miraidons are on the other side of the bracket as well, which again can sometimes be harder matchups here and there. Not too much for Miraidon, but definitely Giratina. So yeah, quite interesting stuff. The Intel list, Intel Urshi list, again, very, very similar. The only noteworthy card really is playing 1 Psychic Energy to be able to use Mind Ruler. Again, I don't think it's ever valuable enough. You can't really set this up in 1 turn because you can't accelerate to this Pokemon, so it never really feels like it's getting too much value. I don't think Mind Ruler is the strongest attack either. I guess it isn't terrible against like the control-y decks, but again, they're just gonna like gust up your Remoraid or whatever and try and trap it, even with your Tower and Waters and stuff like that. So there's not enough switching cards or anything like that to be able to actually... You have 1 Churro, but it feels like there's not enough switching cards for like Radiant Alakazam as a Mind Ruler card to try and knock out Snorlax turn after turn is ever really relevant. Again, they can always just Iono themselves mid-game and just play around it. So yeah, feels like a bit of an outlier here. I'd rather just see it as another Water Energy to just further try and... or try and activate the strategies of Double Gunner plus Snipes or Yoga Loop or whatever. But yeah, I'd be interested to know whether there's any matchup in particular that this Mind Ruler Psychic Energy combo is really important. Again, playing the Remoraids, 60 HP Remoraids, pretty happy to see that. Entei Valiant was, I think this is again was one of the highest placing Entei Valiant lists. I feel like we're kind of settled with Entei Valiant lists now. I think there's up and downs here and there. I think I see Techno Radar in and out every now and again. I'm a huge fan of playing at least a Super Rod in Entei Valiant. I think it's very, very valuable because I think any matchup where it's in your bottom 30 cards, you're often able to Radiant Charizard twice during a game. And if you're able to Radiant Charizard twice during a game, that's pretty broken, to be honest. So can be a little bit awkward finding it in the mid game or in the late game when you've burnt through all of your nest balls and stuff. But typically, hopefully, your deck is thin enough that you're able to find it. I still think the deck has a massive issue with Iono in some instances in the late game, because you can just kind of get Ionoed and you have no draw engine on board. So I think that's the scariest thing, and playing Super Rod doesn't necessarily help that, because it's kind of like a combo-y card, because typically you're playing it to find it in the same turn. So that doesn't necessarily sort of help with that issue that the deck has, but I think that might just be an issue that the deck has, and, you know, there's not really much we can do about that one. So yeah, nothing too surprising from what I can see. I haven't been keeping up with too many Entei Valiant lists, so there could be some outliers here. Like, I feel like Spiritium's not always in the list, but Mew is definitely one of your harder matchups, just because you need to kind of one-shot them, or they can just leap in until they're able to one-shot you. You are able to, like, try and just race on Genesect, I suppose, which is important, but yeah, there's no, like, the supplementary damage you get from Iron Valiant doesn't feel too powerful, so you're playing like a relatively clunky Entei deck, essentially, I feel like, in a lot of instances. Unless you're just, I guess, targeting over and over the same Genesect with your Enteis, with your Iron Valiants, if it's not a fusion build, obviously. But even then, they can just feed it into you with a rope at some point and sort of waste your damage. So maybe that's why Spiritium has to be played, just because it at least stops them going super wide. Again, feels counterintuitive, because you want them to go wide to be able to deal damage with Entei, but hey, if it's the only answer to Mew, it's the only answer to Mew, to be honest. But yeah, other than that, pretty standard list. Again, I'm not super familiar with newer age Entei lists post LAIC, but I can't see anything too wrong with this one overall, to be honest. Only other deck I wanted to mention was the Clorf Electrode. So yeah, they are playing some switching outs. They're playing 4 switching outs, so it's an acceptable amount. Obviously, you've got Ionos and stuff as well. You attack for low cost / no energy, which is really important, because it means that you at least don't need to find that puzzle piece, and you're not too worried about being poison plus burnt as your Electrode, and because your poison plus burnt Electrode can just, like, continually churn out 200 damage turn after turn, deal with whatever's in the opponent's active, and you don't need to find, you're not worried about them knocking you out, because you're just losing the 30 HP for the special conditions each turn. So maybe it's not as bad of a matchup as I thought, as long as you are able to find Electro, but it feels like if you ever end up, like, starting Brute Bonnet or anything like that, or even Bidoof, it's just over. There's not going to be enough switching outs or consistency for finding switch outs. Maybe you have to, like, full commit to then getting Barrel out and really just trying to take 6 prizes before they're able to run you out of your 4 switch outs. Feels quite hard, though. You do have Thornton as well and Power Pad. Okay, I guess there's enough sort of niche outs here and there that maybe maybe you are able to get there. Interesting. I haven't really played this deck too much. I wasn't sold on it at all to begin with, but after seeing it pop up here and there in tournaments, I think it's enough to call it like a pretty viable rogue deck. I don't think I'd ever take it to a tournament personally, but it seems quite fun and seems a bit more reliable than I first thought. So yeah, pretty interesting list, and again, does look like it has a decent amount of outs to stall matchups. Still think it's going to be a bit of an uphill battle, but you have technically 6 outs to switching, plus, again, just the fact that you don't have your attack for free is really important. So yeah, very good stuff. Pokemon Battle Park was the next tournament with, again, Charizard, the most popular deck. Feels like Charizard's been everywhere this week, or the past couple of weeks. Very, very popular archetype. Gardevoir and Chi-Pow and things like that, all the way down here. It looks like it was Charizard's day by far, and then some Lost Zone variants. Lost Box Charizard and Charizard again combined being way higher than every other deck. And again, it was Charizard winning. No surprises when 3 made top cut. Able to beat an Intel Ursh in the final, which is also really impressive, because again, I think this is a bit of a mad matchup for you if they're able to get the Devolve combos off against you. So pretty impressive stuff. Again, this was just a Pidgey build, nothing too surprising. Playing the Minior plus the Tool Jammer. Again, don't really feel the Tool Jammer is necessary. Playing a lot of outs, actually. Playing Minior plus Tool Jammer plus a Switch and a Rope and a Churro and a Power Pad. So this player really was not losing to stall this tournament, which is quite cool to see. Just really committing on saying I'm not going to lose. Not playing the Vitality Band. Again, I really value both Vitality Band and Defiance Band in the deck. So yeah, quite interesting stuff. Also playing the Rotom V over things like Entei. Initially, I was an Entei believer, but I'm starting to see more and more lists just agree that Rotom is like the way to go, which is interesting. I think it's very understandable. I think it's difficult to argue getting a turn 2 play with Rotom, but my biggest concern is you then have to play things like Collapsed or Churro to get the Rotom off the board, and if you're Ionode, it's kind of awkward and it doesn't really do much for you because you're a slow deck anyway. You don't really want to have to then use Instant Charge on the following turn as well, so yeah, a little bit awkward, but I think I'm finally coming around to it probably is the best way to play it over Entei. Entei feels really powerful in some of the 2-prize matchups because you're able to trade a little bit more efficiently and able to race more efficiently because you have an extra attacker, but kind of serves the same purpose as Radiant Zard. So yeah, I can definitely see the necessity in playing Rotom over Radzard. Also noticed this list is a non-Arven build. That's just I've just clocked that it's a non-Arven build. Interesting. No Arvens, heavy Iono. Don't hate it, but it feels like Arven really fits the puzzle together a lot of the time between that and Pidgeot. Again, I guess you have Rotom to try and Rotom plus Forest Seal Stone. You're playing 2 Town Stores, so I guess that's your way of finding Forest Seal Stone. Arven is naturally a very slow card, so being able to draw some cards more consistently is pretty important. Lots of draw supporters in here, yeah. 4 Iono, 1 Avery, 1 Colress, 1 Research. Yeah, interesting. No Counter Catcher as well. No Counter Catcher plus 1 boss, only 1 boss feels kind of scary. Even without Arven, feels like Counter Catcher is a really, really good card. But it's very hard to find without Arven in the mid-game turns, so I can understand that, to be honest. Still a big fan of the Arven build, but maybe there's merit to just a more traditional supporter line here. There's also a Lost Box Charizard that I wanted to briefly touch on because this archetype did really, really well in the Philippines a couple of weeks ago, and it's an archetype that I've been testing myself, and I think it's really, really fun. A couple of counts I personally disagree with. I still think 4 Comfey over 4 Charmander is really important. I think this Mela seems very sort of out of the way and not necessary overall. Don't know how much it adds to the deck. I think there's more important cards. I found the deck to be quite tight overall. There's not a lot of space, so not the biggest fan of the Mela, but yeah, really, really big fan of this deck. I can see myself playing it potentially this weekend, or at least taking it to cups in following weekends if I'm able to do a little bit more testing with it. So yeah, real big fan of the deck. I think Joe is also a huge fan of the deck at the moment. He posted the other day that he was really enjoying it on the channel. So yeah, very, very interesting deck. Yeah, really like it. Other than the couple of quirky supporters here and there, I'm a pretty big fan of the list overall. Onto the Tournament of Doom. Tournament of Doom once again had Charizard as the most popular archetype. Again, pretty standard stuff. We see Clorf Electrode all the way at the 5th most popular archetype though, which is quite funny. Charizard had a pretty low win rate there, which is interesting though. None in top 8, none in top 16, only 1 Lost Box Charizard in top 16. Highest placing Charizard was all the way down in 24th, so didn't convert very well. The winner indeed was Giratina. Very interesting top 8 though. We've got a Giratina, couple of Miraidons, sorry, not Miraidons, Goldengo, sorry. We've got a Miraidon, a couple of Mews. So yeah, not the most typical top 8 you'd expect. Again, Gardevoir not even making it to the top 8 either. So really feels like that deck has sort of had its wings clipped to an extent. This was the winning Tina list. Can't say I'm too surprised by anything in the list other than the second Counter Catcher. 2 Counter Catcher seems really, really powerful, but yeah, I don't know whether it's necessary. Other than that, though, still really like this list. Very, very simple. Nothing too crazy about it. Lots of draw supporters. Roxanne Iono still feel really important in this format to pair with Path. Path still feels very powerful. I could see people cutting to 1 Sableye, but I still think Sableye is such a powerful card, and there will be people that decide not to play Jirachi for whatever reason, especially if Gardevoir isn't doing particularly well, Sableye isn't doing particularly well. Maybe people start to make a space by cutting the Jirachi, which means Sableye value obviously goes through the roof again. So yeah, only other card I'd like to see is probably 1 more switching out, 2 Switch Card plus 2 Rope. I typically am a fan of 5, but 4 Jet Energy kind of mitigates that as well, which is important. But yeah, I feel like this list is quite tight, so I don't think there's too much room for flexibility in it. But I think that's completely fine. I think this list is really, really solid. This would be pretty much, well, very, very close to the kind of list I would be playing, I think, if I were to go back to Tina. Want to take a quick look at the 2 Gholdengo list, just because the archetype has been relatively underrepresented in the format so far. This is by far still my favourite way of playing it. I think the Basque Legion package is really important. But one huge outlier for me is just the inclusion of the 70 HP Gimmighouls. I completely understand it in terms of where the format is right now. We have Rapid Strike doing really, really well again. We have still Entei Valiant, that's a very popular archetype. But the whole idea of Basculin is the fact that it's a free... it's a 0 energy attacker, so you're able to get it into the active by paying 1 retreat. And the 70 HP Gimmighouls have 2 retreat, which means it's very difficult to actually get into the active and gather the crew. So feels like there's a bit of counter synergy there. You've only got 1 switching out as well in Escape Rope, so it's not even like you can necessarily always reliably find your switching out. Obviously, you have things like Irida, but you never really want to have to Irida for your switch out on turn 1 just to gather the crew. You'd always rather... like basically VIP pass, because that switches off 4 VIP passes in your deck then, which is a shame. But yeah, huge fan of the list still, other than that. Still really like the Pyukimukyu. I think the deck in general is still a lot of fun. A little bit better than I think it's actually given credit for, or where it's falling in the metagame. I think it's still a really, really cool archetype. I think it definitely has some issues, but I definitely implore you to give the archetype a go. It's so much fun, and like I say, I can't ever argue with like the water package. It's such a powerful addition of cards that naturally synergizes really, really well with the deck. Similarly, and this is kind of the same thing I want to talk about in this build. Like, this build is also playing a water package. It's playing a 2/2 Palkia as an alternative attacker along with the Sizzle, as well as like playing the Irida package. I feel like if you're playing the Irida package, you're able to just trim some of the fat, like the Sizzles and stuff, and play the Gather the Crew. Even with Palkia, still playing Gather the Crew still feels very, very good. Again, being able to Irida for Gather the Crew plus a VIP pass. Oh, this isn't playing VIP. Oh, it is. It's playing 1 VIP. Wild. Okay, so maybe this was an always choose to go second deck. But even with that, only 1 Irida. Oh, sorry, only 2 Irida and 1 VIP pass makes things a little bit sketchy. So yeah, not as much of a fan of this list compared to the other Gholdengo list. But I think I think the concept is still there, being able to use Palkia as a mid-game attacker, plus also have some like another texture to the deck, being able to attack with Radiant Greninja, because people just will not be prepared to put down Manaphy against you. Obviously, I guess when they see the Palkia, they're maybe more inclined to, so maybe that's not as relevant of a point, but typically you wouldn't be playing against sniping in this kind of deck, so still another thing that players have to think about. But again, I'd love to see sort of a overhaul to the engine to try and introduce the other water Pokemon and a higher count of VIP pass, just so if you are forced to go first, you're not, like, you're basically stranded, right? You have very, very little to do if you're going first, and that's really scary because obviously it makes your deck better, because if you're going first and you don't have all these VIP passes, you're not as clunky in the mid-turns, but you'd rather just get as many Gimmighouls down out as quickly as possible to start using coin bonus for as much value and as many cards as possible. So yeah, I feel like the engine needs a bit of an overhaul personally, but I can still see the value here. I haven't seen too many Palkia lists. I know there's been some talk about Palkia lists in the past, so maybe this is more standard, more closer to a more standard Palkia list. But again, I can't really argue against the Basque Legion package and stuff like that. So it feels like you could even blend these two decks well together quite well. So yeah. Second to last completed tournament is going to be the Primetime tournament. This was for 1,000 codes, so there's a lot online here, and you can see Miraidon, Charizard, and Gardevoir were the most popular decks, all boasting above 50% win rates, with Giratina also boasting a 60% win rate, which is very impressive. Lost Zone and Maroon sort of not doing particularly well. Fusion Mew was the winner of the tournament. Again, this was another top 16, and there's plenty of Mew in here. You've got 2 Fusion Mews, 2 DT Mews, a few Charizards, a few Giratinas. Again, only 1 Guardy, which is interesting. We've even got an Arceus deck in here as well, which we will take a look at. But Fusion Mew kicking things off. Interestingly, playing the Jet Energy. I'd be really interested to know why, or learn more about the inclusion of the Jet Energy. I don't really feel it serves too much of a purpose when you have So many, like, you have so many free retreaters anyway. I don't know. So, well, typically so many free retreaters and so many switch cards that I don't know why necessarily you would need a Jet Energy. Maybe it's for some kind of stall tactics or something. I don't know. But yeah, very interesting stuff. There's a lot going on in this list. There's also the TM Devo and the cleansing gloves and stuff. I feel like there's a lot of different things going on. A lot of different sort of tech inclusions here and there that I don't necessarily know are always needed. Very heavy on the town store plus 6 tools as well. So yeah, don't hate the town store plus 6 tools, to be honest. I like being able to tutor out specific tools. I think it's very important when you're running a variety of one-offs as well. So yeah, the scary thing with Mew is basically you end up in situations where you need to Ultra Ball to thin your hand down, and you have these like random one-off tools that you can't necessarily make use of, which is a bit scary these days. Back when there was more discard or more flexible discard with things like Quick Ball, it made things a bit easier because you could weave cards in and out of your hand a little bit easier. Now you're very reliant on Ultra Ball as a discard mechanic and Lost Vacuum as a hand thinning mechanic to try and draw your deck. So feels like these one-offs are a little bit weaker, but they are tutorable by Town Store, which is important. So yeah, pretty interesting stuff. I like I say, I'm really curious to see where the Jet Energy comes in to play, and also double Meloetta is quite interesting. Typically, double Meloetta is not seen in these decks. It's often one Meloetta and one Ice Cube, but maybe with people picking up things like Screamtail and stuff like that, and obviously the constant threat of Greninja, there was not much use for Ice Cube. But again, I still feel like maybe a third VMAX would typically be more popular than a single or than another Meloetta or a second Meloetta. So yeah, very interesting list. Definitely have some questions about this one, but still think the deck is really, really solid. The only Miraidon archetype we're going to take a look at today is just the 16 energy build, like the double Peony build that started to pick up in popularity with a thinner fluffy line, just trying to really push for the Iron Hands turn 1. I haven't tested this deck personally. I've only tested a little bit of regular Miraidon, and I haven't tested this version myself. Pretty interesting stuff. I can see how Iron Hands can just push people out of the game, push certain decks out of the game, like Charizard, like Gardevoir. Can definitely see that sort of situation where you still have things like the Raichu backup to try and, I guess, close out the game if Iron Hands doesn't completely push them out. But yeah, I have played against it a couple of times. It's an interesting archetype to play against, but I can't say I've played with the archetype too much. So definitely would be interested to see sort of whether this build is particularly popular going forward, or whether the more reliable or the thicker fluffy line ends up still being the most popular build. But yeah, I think Azul's been playing quite a lot of this, and I know a couple of other players have really been picking it up and repping it in tournaments as well. So evidently there's something there, just trying to really take advantage of the strength of Iron Hands. Here's that Arceus deck that I wanted to mention. This is just a Arceus plus Grass Attackers deck. Pretty interesting stuff. Toedscruel, the Toedscruel package for various different matchups, helping against, well, this one helping against the Chien-Paos, the Goldengos, that kind of stuff, and this one helping against all of the more annoying things like Sableye and stuff like that. I can't see Arceus being I still can't see Arceus being too powerful in this metagame. I think there's too much going against it. But you do have like a lot of upside. You've got Grass Attackers to deal with Charizard, which I think typically is one of your more difficult matchups because you don't trade particularly well into them, especially in the late game. You do when you have Grass Attackers, so that's important. Gardevoir still seems kind of sketchy, but you do have Path plus Iono/Judge to try and push them out of the game. Again, feels like that's nothing they're not prepared for, but maybe with enough Pathing plus Judging, you're able to get to the point where your Arceuses are just you're just too far ahead. But not having particularly good one-prize attackers, I think, is often the downfall of some Gardevoir, of some decks into Gardevoir. Shaman is like a really bad attacker into Guardy just because they need so little to be able to deal with it. Toedscruel isn't much better, at least gives up. Well, in fact, it's pretty much the same because the HP totals, so yeah, it's pretty much identical. So yeah, can't help but thinking it's going to be a bit of an uphill battle for some matchups, but the power of Path plus Iono, you know, you're going to just cheese some games here and there, so that just could be a good enough win condition. in a deck like Arceus, as it kind of has been in the past. And the final tournament we're going to talk about is the other Redacted tournament. Again, Charizard being very, very popular. It feels like I say, Charizard is absolutely everywhere at the moment. But it was Guardy's time to shine again and ended up taking first place. Again, pretty varied. Top 8, beat a Snorlax in the final. Couple of potentially difficult matchups in top 4 as well as, again, even some potentially difficult top 8 matchups as well. So, yeah, very, very respectable run for Gardevoir, facing what looked to be a bit of a trepidatious top 8, was able to make the run and win the tournament. Playing the Zacian over the Capes is one of the only notable things. Also playing the Zinnia's Resolve as a draw supporter over like a 4th Iono. Can't say I'm the biggest fan. I really think that 4th Iono is super important, but yeah, I can kind of understand only playing 3. I also don't think Zinnia is a particularly strong supporter. I think if ever I would cut an Iono, it would be just for a research, but hey. Is playing the 3 VIP pass. I played 3 VIP pass in Gdansk, and it felt completely fine, to be honest. So I don't hate that. But I did play an extra Fog Crystal over the 4th VIP. So this one's still only playing the 2 Fog Crystal, but is playing a Hisuian Heavy Ball. So I guess like like 3/4 of an out there as well, which is definitely worth noting. Plus, obviously, Elemental of Heavy Ball is always somewhat justifiable for trying to make sure you know your prizes and don't struggle too much trying to work out what they are and stuff. So yeah, nothing too surprising with this Guardy list. Just wanted to point out that this there's still still feel like there's a bit of a divide on whether Zacian or Cape is correct. I'm on the side of Zacian. One Zacian has won a tournament, but also a Cape has won a tournament, so it still feels like it's a bit up in the air overall. So the final thing I wanted to note is currently going on right now is Late Night 157. Again, I'm recording this on the Wednesday before I head off, so not going to be able to look at these results. Probably will do that in next week's weekly results, so we'll be able to see how this tournament plus Stuttgart kind of affects maybe going into San Antonio. But yeah, just wanted to show the metagame right now. Again, Tina Lostbox doing very well, Gardevoir, Charizard still up there. But yeah, pretty standard stuff. Quite a few Lost Zone decks. Lost Zone starting to rise in popularity again. Maybe again trying to capitalize on people not playing those Jirachis and stuff here and there. Standings at the moment, I do need to refresh this actually because we've had a couple of rounds since I started the tournament, or started the video, sorry. Looks like Miraidon's doing pretty well. Charizard, Guardy's, plenty of Guardy's actually doing, going 4-0 at the moment. Nothing too surprising. A 301 drop from the Snorlax stall player there. But yeah, it looks like there's an Arceus Tapu Koko list. Let's take a very brief look at this list. Interesting. Playing one Snorlax doll. That's crazy. That's that is crazy. One Snorlax doll. One Cologne. I guess Cologne is for things like Mimikyu and Snorlax. Interesting. Be interesting to see how this list finishes. Snorlax doll is not a card that I'm a particularly large fan of overall, so yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that one finishes. But yeah, if you're interested in playing these tournaments, make sure you check out the Potown store, where you can get 5% off your order using code OmniPoke. You can pick up codes for these tournaments to then play on PTCG Live. So yeah, definitely make sure you check them out. And other than that, if you're heading to Gdansk, no, not Gdansk, if you're heading to Stuttgart this weekend, feel free to come say hi to Joe and myself. We will both be there. And yeah, other than that, thank you so much for watching. I've been Jack from OmniPoke, and I look forward to seeing you guys in another video soon. Cheers, everyone.